Welcome to Lecture 2C of Lesson 2. In the previous lectures of Lesson 2, we talked about the Greek accents and preliminary definitions of the Greek syllable structures. We learned that there are three accents: the acute, the circumflex, and the grave, as well as the three types of syllable structures: the ultima, the penult, and the antepenult. We also went over the general rules of accent, and we showed the 6 rules of accent. Now, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the rule of verb accent and the rule of noun accent. Paragraph 13, rule of verb accent. Verbs have recessive accent. I'd highlight that if I were you. Now, what does that mean? Well, the rule means that in verbs, the accent goes back as far as the general rules of accent will permit. This rule definitely fixes the accent of any verb form. It is not necessary to know what verb the form is derived from, or to have any other information whatever. Knowing that it is a verb form, one needs only to look at the ultima. If the ultima is short, an acute must be placed on the antepenult, supposing the word to have as many as 3 syllables. But if the ultima is long, the acute must be placed on the penult. Example. I love Machen's examples. Suppose a verb form of enosku is to be accented. In accordance with the rule of verb accent, the accent is trying to get as far back as the general rules of accent will permit. But egenosku would violate Rule 1. Notice the accent is above here's the ultima, here's the penult, here's the antepenult. It goes all the way back. Well, it can't go any farther back than the antepenult. So this right here, accenting structure, would violate Rule 1. And since the ultima is long, sure is, look at the sku, egenosku, that's a long vowel structure. It's a diphthong. The ultima is long. Egenosku would violate Rule 3a. Why? Because this is long. It cannot go back to the antepenult. Okay? Therefore, the penult must be accented. But egenosku with the circumflex would violate Rule 3b. Therefore, egenosku with the acute is correct. On the other hand, if a verb form egenoske, see the epsilon? That's short. If the verb form egenoske is to be accented, although egenoske is forbidden by Rule 1, let's see, 1, 2, 3, that's the 4th one. That acute goes all the way in the back, now can't happen. That would violate Rule 1, it's forbidden. Egenoske with the acute above the antepenult is permitted. You see, this is short. Because this is short, that antepenult will be accented. Okay, it's permitted. And since verbs have recessive accent, that accenting egenoske with the acute above the antepenult is correct. And egenoske with the circumflex above the omega, or egenoske with the acute above the ultima, would be wrong. It would be wrong because verbs are recessive. If the verb has only 2 syllables, Rule 4 often comes into play. Thus, if the verb form, say, sodze, is to be accented, the rule of recessive verb accent decrees that the former of the two syllables shall be accented. But Rule 4 decrees that the accent shall not be sodze with the acute above the penult, but sodze with the circumflex above the penult. Do you see how it works? So, wrapping up here, the rule of verb accent says that verbs are fully recessive when it comes to accenting, but they still must submit to the general rules of accents. Paragraph 14. Rule of Noun Accent. In nouns, the accent remains on the same syllable as in the nominative singular, so nearly as the general rules of accent will permit. Whoa, you might be saying, what's a nominative singular? Well, you're going to learn that. You're going to find out that nouns they include the gender, number, and case. Is it a singular or plural? Is it a feminine, masculine, or neuter? And the case, the nominative case, is the focal point on nouns. So when we look at a noun, we look at its nominative singular form, and that will tell us how far back the accent will remain, how far it will go back as the general rules of accent will permit. Okay? Don't panic about that. We're going to learn about nominative cases coming up, and it's really not as difficult. You're just not familiar with it if you're brand new to Greek. Now, explanation. This rule, the rule of noun accent, differs from the rule of verb accent in that it does not of itself fix the accent of the noun forms. The accent on the nominative singular, and this is the form that we'll be giving you in your vocabulary lists, must be learned by observation for every noun separately, just as the spelling of the word must be learned. So much is merely a part of the learning of the vocabularies. But when once the accent on the nominative singular has been given, the accent on the other forms of the noun is fixed by the rule. Let's take a look at some examples. Example number 1 here. If there be a noun, logos. Okay, it's the word logos. Neither the general rules of accent in paragraph 11 nor the rule of noun accent will determine whether the accent is logos with the acute above the penult or logos where the acute is above the ultima. But once it has been determined that the accent is above the penult, then the accent on the other forms of the noun can be determined. Other forms, you might say? Oh, yes. See, logos is the nominative singular form of the word. But that noun can change shape based on its case. See, you have lagu, lago, lagon, lage, or it can change in the relationship to the number. Is it singular or plural? Lagoi, lagon, lagois, lagus. On every one of these forms, the acute will stand on the penult, since A, the rule of noun accent decrees that the accent remains there if the general rules of accent permit, and since B, the general rules of accent never forbid the accent to be placed on an penult, and since C, Rule 2 decrees that only an acute accent can stand on a short syllable. Why? Because the omicron is a short syllable. Okay? So there's example number 1. Example number 2. In the case of the noun oikos, its various forms being after the analogy of logos above, A and B of the considerations mentioned above with regards to logos still hold, but C does not hold, since here the penal is not short but long. So you have an omicron iota. Well, that omicron iota is not the final omicron iota, so it's in there. It's a long. In this case, rules 3b and 4 will determine when the accent is acute and when it is a circumflex. When the ultimate is long, the accent on the penal will be an acute. And when the ultimate is short, the accent on the penal will be a circumflex. So here's some examples here. You have oikos. The omicron is short. This is long. Therefore, you'd have the circumflex above the penal. Second word, oiku. Well, the omicron upsilon is long, so you need the acute above the penal. How about here? Oiko. Well, it's an omega with a iota subscript, so that would be long, and because that's long, the penal would have to have an acute. Another example, oikon. Short, circumflex. Oike, another short, circumflex. Oikoi. What? Oikoi? Is that not long? No, remember, alpha iota or omicron iota, if it's a final at the end of the word, it is short. Therefore, look at that. The circumflex will fall on the penal. Next word, oikon. Omega is long, penal gets the acute. Shifting down here for another example. Oikois. That's a long omicron iota. Why? Because the sigma is following it. That's long. That means there's an acute above the penal. And, of course, finally, oikus. Long ultima, accent above the penal is the acute. Okay? Case number 3. In the case of a noun anthropos, the accent is trying in every other form to get back to the antepenult, in accordance with the rule of noun accent. Since it is the antepenult of which is accented in the nominative singular, but where the ultimate is long, the accent cannot get back to the antepenult, since that would violate Rule 3a. The nearest syllable to the antepenult which it can reach in these cases is the penal. The rule of noun accent decrees that nearest syllable is the one upon which the accent must stand. But since the ultimate is long, in these cases, Rule 3b decrees that the accent above the penal shall be an acute, not a circumflex. So, thus, let's take a look at some of them. We have anthropos. There's our nominative singular, and we notice that normally it would land on the antepenult. But look here, anthropou. There's a long ultima. That long ultima forces this to go back to the penal. Because this is long, that's accented with an acute. What about anthropo? Well, the omega with the iota subscript is long. The acute goes back to the penal. Anthropon, this next example here, that is a short vowel. That means it allows the acute to go all the way back to the antepenult. Anthrope, well, ultima short, goes back to the antepenult. Anthropoi, omicron iota, Omicron iota is a diphthong. It is short because it's final, and it allows to go back to the antepenulti acute. Anthropo, anthropone. Well, the pone ultima is long, forces the acute above the penult. Anthropois, anthropois. Omicron iota sigma, that's long. The acute falls on the penult. And finally here we have anthropous, anthropous. Well, the Omicron upsilon sigma is long, and it forces that accent to only go back to the penult. Now you might be saying, well, isn't that a long vowel there? Shouldn't it have a circumflex? It would, but the problem is that this us is a long. Therefore, the penult gets an accent, an acute accent, and not a circumflex. Case number 4. Let's take a look at case number 4. In the case of a noun, hadas, hadas, notice the rough breather mark, hadas. The accent will stand in every form upon the ultima, since the general rules of accent never prevent the accent from standing on an ultima. If the ultima is short, the accent must, of course, be an acute. But if the ultima is long, the accent, so far as the general rules are concerned, can either be an acute or a circumflex. In these cases, therefore, the rules far given will not determine which accent is to be used. Thus, examples, hadas, short and acute. Hadan, ultima. See, notice, excuse me, the nominative singular, the accent falls on the ultima. Because of the rules of noun accent, it cannot go back any further than what's found on the nominative singular. So we take a little word hadan, has to stay on the ultima, so it's an acute. Hadeh, acute on the ultima. Hadoi. But whether hadu, hado, or hadon, or hadois or hadus, whether they take an acute or all of them can take a circumflex, both are correct and must be left for future determination. The decision is part of the learning of the declension of this particular class of nouns. So, the general rules of apply, noun accent, that the accent cannot go any further back than what is found on the noun's nominative singular form. After that, all the general rules of apply. See the difference between a noun and a verb accenting. Verb accenting, just to recap, is fully recessive. It'll go back as far as the general rules will apply. The noun accenting is different. You have to know what the nominative singular form of the Greek word is to determine how far back the accent will go. Now, I would suggest that you take these exercises very seriously. Use it to stretch your skills, to analyze what you've learned in this lesson so far, and apply what you've learned. We can go over these exercises, some of these exercises, and I'd also like to, in our lab coming up, is take a look at the Greek New Testament and see how the rules apply there. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email address is at the end of the video. Best wishes to you, and do your best. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me when you can. Thank you.